Hi, everyone. So I'm just going to go over the week 5 review. I did record this session in the class when I did it after the lab, this review, and unfortunately it did not save to my computer. So I am just kind of go through everything again and explain the little quiz that I have here. And then also talk about like some of the comparison things that you might see on the exam. So to start off, I'm just going to scroll down. So please like pause the video and screenshot or like go through and answer the questions. Here are the questions. And then I will refer to like my photos or the way that I study while I talk about these concepts. So I'm going to scroll down and show you the way that I study tooth anatomy. So I like to make drawings. So these are the maxillary teeth. Starting at the top, those triangles, that's the maxillary central incisor, and then the heart is the second molar. So when I refer to like my drawings, this is what I mean. And then here are the roots of the teeth, the same thing. This is the maxillary, the one at the very top, that's the central incisor. And then at the back with the 3 roots, that one, those 2 are the molars. So this is for maxillary. These are just ways to remember like the shapes that outline certain things about the cusps. And then I have the same thing for the mandibular. So on the bottom now, the rectangle with a line through it, that one is the central incisor, and then going up to that corner, that one is the second molar, and then same thing with the roots here. So please like pause and take note of what these look like. I'll go through it slowly again so you can see them. And this might not work for you, but this is just the way that I was able to like memorize the tooth anatomy. It was through like drawing it out instead of seeing just like the bulleted list. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. And I'm going to go through it a little bit quick. So please, like, if you don't understand one of the questions, pause, think about it, and then come back to the recording. And also, like, after this, if you have any last minute questions before the exam this weekend, please like text me. My number's on the Canvas page, and I'm more than happy to explain some of the tooth anatomy that we're learning in this class. So starting off, number 1, true or false. So this one is false. So for the mandibular premolars and molars, the first molar is going to be small, and then the second molar is, the first premolar is smaller than the second premolar, and then the first molar is bigger than the second molar. And so scrolling down to my little photos, I wrote that out right here. It says small, big, big, small. That's how I remember it, is when I draw the picture, starting with the first mandibular premolar, that one's small, then it goes big, big, small, just comparing them to one another. That helped me. If it confuses you, just forget about it. But that is how I remembered the relative sizes of the mandibular premolars and molars. Okay, number 2, which of the following is true for the mandibular central incisor out of these options? So A is true. It is the narrowest tooth of all incisors in the mouth, narrowest mesial distally. And then D, it occludes with only one opposing tooth. This means that when you close your jaw or occlude, it only overlaps with the maxillary central incisors. So those are the 2 true statements for the mandibular central incisor. Okay, number 3, which tooth appears twisted distally on its root to follow the mandibular arch curvature? This will be the mandibular lateral incisor. Okay, true or false? Both the maxillary and mandibular teeth have a 90-degree mesio-incisal and disto-incisal angles. So this one is actually false. The mandibular, oh, you know what? I just realized it should be central incisors. I'm so sorry. Okay, let me rephrase. Both the maxillary and mandibular central incisors have a 90-degree mesioincisal and distal incisal angles. I'm so sorry, that was probably confusing. So this statement is false because the maxillary central incisor, the distoincisal angle is rounded. The mandibular central incisor, both of those angles are 90-degree. But on the maxillary, the only angle on the incisal that's 90 degrees is the mesioincisal angle right in the middle. Okay, which cuspids have one root canal or one root? So this is something that's pretty important. The maxillary cuspids have one root canal and one root. So I'm going to scroll down to my root photos to show you guys what I mean. So let's say this is the maxillary teeth. If you look, the third tooth down, the one that says longest, strongest root and deep depression distal surface, that only has one root. This is how I drew out the diagram of the roots. Or whereas the mandibular cuspids, those actually have two roots and they can be split into two different canals, but there are two roots no matter what for the mandibular cuspids. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to comparing and contrasting teeth. The cuspids for the maxillary and mandibular teeth have different roots. And then also I'd like to highlight while we're talking about this, the maxillary cuspids have the longest and strongest roots in all of human dentition. And that's something that's like a pretty common question for the exam. So keep that in mind as you're taking the exam. Okay, let's see, where were we? 6, what are the differences between the mandibular first and second molar cusps? What about the premolar cusps? So here I'm just asking you to compare and contrast all of the cusps for the mandibular teeth. And this is pretty significant because he might ask you a question about comparing what cusps are and what their differences are, especially between like premolars and molars. So for the mandibular first and second molars, the way they differ is that the first mandibular molar has 5 cusps and the second mandibular molar has 4. So that's an important difference between those two. And then for the premolars, the mandibular first premolar has 1 buccal cusp and 1 lingual cusp. But the mandibular second molar has 1 buccal cusp, so that's the cusp that's facing your cheek, and then it has 2 lingual cusps. And this isn't something that's really blatantly stated in the workbook, but there is a section, if you flip to the page, that talks about the mandibular second premolar. And I know I'm going through this really quickly, so please like pause the video and get to that page if you need to. But there is a section that talks about that on the mandibular second premolar, the mesiolingual cusp is bigger than the distolingual cusp. That means there are 2 lingual cusps on your mandibular second molar, or second premolar, sorry, 2 lingual cusps on your mandibular second premolar. So keep that in mind as a difference while you take the exam. Okay, number 7, true or false? Mandibular molars have roots that are situated mesially and distally. So this question is asking, are the mandibular roots mesial and distal? And the answer to that question is yes. For your mandibular molars, they have 1 mesial root and 1 distal root. For your maxillary molars, you have 2 buccal roots. One of them is mesial buccal, the other one is distal buccal. The third one is lingual. So this is something that you should look back through the workbook at the actual photos and take a look at the roots. You can tell for the mandibular molars, their roots are pretty far apart. There's only 2. There's 1 mesial, 1 distal. But if you flip back to the maxillary molars, you can see there's 2 on the buccal, one of them's mesial and one of them's distal, and then 1 lingual. So it's a tripod shape for the molars on the maxillary side of your mouth. Okay, and again, like I'm going through this super, super quickly because I know you guys can like pause and come back to things. But please reach out if you have any questions about any of this, and I can slow down and explain to you what I'm thinking and saying. But please, as like you're going through this video, like pause, look back at your notes, make sure you're understanding what I'm saying. I know it's a lot of like jargon. I'm saying a lot of mesial, distal, maxillary, mandible, all those things, but please make sure that as I'm talking, you're starting to like understand what I'm saying. Okay, so this section, I wanted to just highlight some differences between the teeth and the mouth, because not only is it important to understand the anatomy of a tooth, but also like how it differs from the other teeth in the mouth. So number one, describe the relative sizes of all the maxillary premolars and molars, as well as the mandibular premolars and molars. So I kind of talked about this already, but for the maxillary teeth, the first premolar is bigger than the second premolar, and the first molar is bigger than the second molar. For the mandibular teeth, the first premolar is smaller than the second premolar, and the second molar is bigger than, the first molar is bigger than the second molar for the mandibular teeth. Okay, I hope I said that slow enough for you to get that. Again, you can go through your book again, but make sure you know the differences between the molar sizes when you're comparing the maxillary teeth to themselves and the mandibular teeth. Okay, what are the occlusal outlines of the premolars? So the maxillary premolars, the first premolar is a hexagon. The second premolar is like an ovoid or oval shape. And then for the mandibular teeth, the first premolar is a diamond, and the second premolar is a rounded square. So make sure you understand the differences. So if you were to ask which tooth has a diamond occlusal outline, you can remember, oh, that would be the mandibular first premolar. Okay, number 3, describe the buccal and lingual cusps of all 4 premolars. So a lot of these questions, I just want to highlight some differences between the teeth. So for this one, I just want to talk about how the individual cusps of the premolars are different from tooth to tooth. So I'm just going to really quickly highlight some points for the premolars. So we're going to start with the maxillary first premolar. So for the maxillary first premolar, the buccal cusp is about 1 millimeter higher than the lingual cusp, and that is its special difference with the cusp sizes. For the second maxillary premolar, the lingual and buccal cusps are about at the same height. And then for the mandibular first premolar, the buccal cusp is nearly twice as big as the lingual cusp. So the buccal cusp is way bigger than the lingual cusp for the mandibular first molar. For the mandibular second molar, there are 2 lingual cusps, and we already kind of talked about that. But my point with this question is go through and make sure you understand how those differ, because he could ask, like which premolar has a buccal cusp that is about 1 millimeter higher than the lingual. So that's a good thing to understand. Okay. Number 4, describe the labial / buccal cusp tips of the maxillary cuspid first premolar and second premolar. So for this one, I just wanted to compare and contrast where the cusp tip lies for these teeth. And so what I mean when I say that is for your maxillary cuspid, the cusp tip lies mesially. So what that means is the distance from the cusp tip to the mesial side of the tooth is less than the distance from the cusp tip to the distal side of the tooth. And this is something you can go back and look at on your workbook. Whereas for the first premolar, the mesial slope is long and straight and the distal slope is short and rounded. And then second premolar, it's the same as the cuspid. The cusp tip lies mesial. So go back through, double check those, make sure you're understanding what that means, and how those differ, especially between the first premolar and second premolar. I got that question on my exam. I remember that. Okay, number 5, what are the outlines of the molars? So these are the occlusal outlines. So starting with your maxillary first molar, it's a square to rhomboidal. Sorry, forgot my shape there. It's square to rhomboidal. The maxillary second molar is a heart shape. The mandibular first molar is a pentagon, and the maxillary second molar is a rectangle. I'm so sorry. The mandibular second molar is a rectangle. So go back and make sure you understand. And this is where like my drawings that I keep talking about, these drawings are so helpful. I am a visual learner. That's why like words like pentagon, I don't really know. I think of the shape. So go through, understand what these look like, not just the word, square, rectangle, pentagon, whatever. Look at what the outlines actually look like, and that might help you with jogging your memory on the exam. Okay, and then let's see. What is the similarity and difference between the cusp of Carabelli on the maxillary first molar and the distal cusp of the mandibular first molar? So both of these cusps are fifth cusps, right? We have 4 on the maxillary first molar, and then that cusp of Carabelli, and then the mandibular first molar has 5 cusps. So these are the additional 5th cusps. The difference is that the cusp of Carabelli is non-functional. It has 0 function when it comes to like grinding and mashing your food, whereas the distal cusp on the mandibular first molar, that is functional and it aids us in chewing, mashing up food. Okay, number 7, how are the molar roots different from the mandibular maxillary teeth? So we already kind of covered this, but what I wanted to kind of hit home with this is the fact that on your mandibular teeth, you have 1 distal and 1 mesial root on the mandibular teeth. And then on the maxillary teeth, on the maxillary molars, you have 3 roots. One is mesiobuccal, one is distobuccal, and one is lingual. So it's like the tripod shape. Okay, so I went through that very, very quickly and I apologize. I just wanted to make sure I could record this and get this up since I know the exam for the semester is this weekend. And I'm just going to go through this and show this one more time. So for people who have not been at my reviews in person, I explained this a little bit last week, but I drew out like photos to help me study because I can't, like, looking at the long list of words didn't help me study the tooth anatomy. What helped me was drawing these types of little pictures to try to get like what the words are saying into like an image in my head. So what I did when I took the exam or when I was studying is I just drew these over and over again. And as I was drawing, I would kind of like think or like say what the certain thing means that I'm drawing out. And then same with the roots. This is a great thing. When you get to the testing center, they have like slips of like paper that you can use as like scratch paper, and you are allowed to take those. So you can take one right when your test opens. You can draw out these little diagrams to help jog your memory while you're taking the test. So if you memorize like how to draw out this root guide, then you can sit down and like draw out before you even look at the questions. And while you're doing the questions, you can kind of like refer back to your notes of the guide. That's what I did when I took the exam. And then same here, I have the mandibular teeth. I have these little drawings, these little shapes that just like jog my memory. When I'm looking at these, when I took the exam, I drew out these little shapes and it helped jog my memory about certain aspects of certain teeth. And then I did the same thing with the roots. So You don't have to do this. What works for me might not work for you, but if you are more of like a visual learner and you learn by like seeing things and not by like reading words, this might help you. It really helped me. Also, shout out to Cambry. She made these root guides. She's a TA from last year. She's great. So I just wanted to go through and kind of explain one more time what those drawings mean and why I thought they were helpful. And then another thing I told the students who were at the review tonight is something else that might be helpful for you when you have your scratch paper and you first open up the exam is to draw out crosses like on the workbook where the numbering system is. There's like crosses and then the numbering system that goes around. I would draw out the crosses and then I would write the numbers or letters kind of like the four corners of each arch. So for example, if I was doing the universal system, I would draw it out and then I'd draw like 1, 8, 9, 16. I'd go like around the circle. That way, when you open up the exam and you start reading the questions and they start asking you like about this tooth number and that tooth number, and it starts getting like jumbled in your head, you can go back to your little cheat sheet that you made at the beginning of the exam and take a look to kind of jog your memory, reorient yourself. Additionally, if you draw out at the beginning of the exam the different systems, so like Universal, Palmer, International / FDI, you'll be able to like slow down, remember which system you're looking at, and make sure that you're aligning the right tooth with the right numbering system. He may mix up the tooth numbering questions with the anatomy questions. So for example, he'd say, what angle is the mesial incisal angle of the of tooth number 9? And so if you didn't know like that's a maxillary central incisor, then like that would be difficult. So make sure that you have the numbering down and you can use the numbering to apply these anatomy questions, if that makes sense. So that is all I have. That's a lot of information. I really hope this was helpful. Again, like if this was a bunch of like jumble, like ton of words coming at you, don't really understand, like go back, read through your workbook again, come back and watch the video, pause it, do whatever you need to do to make this understandable. And if you're still struggling, like please reach out to me. I'd love to answer any questions before your exam. And that is all I have for you. Good luck. You guys are all going to do so great. I can't wait to see how you do. And good luck studying.